So we haven't talked about one of the biggest benefits to planting soybeans early yet, and that is to let the farmers with an itchy trigger finger get out there and plant something, instead of pushing the envelope on corn.
Right, because you planted corn in these trials too at the same planting dates, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we wanted to generate some information about, what's the penalty, what's the benefit to planting soybeans early. We've kind of established it's not very much penalty to planting early, and there is a benefit, at least a potential benefit.
Yeah.
But with corn, we all know corn's a little bit less forgiving than soybeans, but it's always nice to generate some data to kind of show that. So for the last couple of years, we've been planting corn and soybeans on all the same planting dates, so that we can see how they perform relative to each other. So again, this year, this is what we saw this year. We planted the corn at that very early date, and we actually, I'm sorry, this graph is, we didn't actually plant the corn at the March 10th planting date. That's just part of the curve going over there. We didn't plant corn that early. We planted corn starting on the second planting date on April 7th. So this is actually where the corn planting started. And you can see here, as we plant early, our corn yield is going to go up if we wait for a little bit better conditions. There's a penalty to planting corn earlier, and we know that. Planting corn into suboptimal conditions is never a good thing. Right. But beans, as long as the soil conditions are okay, I'm personally not that concerned about what the forecast looks like. Even if it's going to be cold, even if we think there's going to be a frost, beans are a lot more forgiving of frost than people realize.
Surprising.
Yeah, it's totally not what conventional wisdom was.
Right,
even 5 years ago.
You burn the cotyledons off and you're done, right? But with corn, you're able to regrow below the ground level.
Yeah. But we've really seen kind of a different story in our research.
Yeah.
So, I'm a big believer in numbers, so if I see it with my own eyes and there's the numbers to back it up, I'll change my mind.
Yep.
So like I said, we've been doing this for 2 years, and so this graph, it shows the 2 years data compiled, and it's kind of the same thing that we talked about before. We graphed on a 0 to 100% so that we can compare across years. But this is all the corn and soybean planting dates where we planted a comparison. And you can see here really the same thing that we saw in 2021, but as we go over a number of years, we really start to generate a nice smooth curve. And what we see is, up until about mid-April, which is the traditional planting date for corn, right? April 15th is kind of the traditional, at least in a lot of our areas, where people would start planting corn. That's where we see, the corn kind of pass up the soybeans, but really the optimal date of what we've seen in this, just 2 locations, but I think it's indicative, is early May for maximum corn yield. And then for soybeans, we see kind of what we've seen before. We see that kind of flat, and then it drops off as we get later in the growing season.
It's actually surprising to me how high the corn curve stays, even into early mid-June is where it basically crosses that 90% level, which I assumed it would be 80% by that point. So that's surprising.
Exactly. Yeah. There's just, I guess the corn window, there's maybe a narrower window for corn, and it's maybe a little bit later than what we think.
Interesting.
And soybeans, really any time early, we're looking at fairly low risk, I believe.